Hello and welcome everybody. My name is PU Roy. I'm a program manager here at University of Washington Professional and Continuing Education. This is the final of our four series Transformation Tuesdays Career Resources webinars. This is the first time we've done online events and we're very excited with its success. Thank you for the hundreds of people who've attended, whether you've attended one or two or all of them. We're very grateful. Thank you for everybody who left feedback, not just here on the chats, but also reached out to Enrollment Services to give us feedback. If you had any suggestions for improvements or other events that you would like to see in the next few months, we'd love to hear. We have some things being planned, though nothing is certain for as of yet. So please, we'd love to hear any ideas of what you'd like to see in terms of programming. As always, the slides and recording will be posted back to the website where the event at the event page where you first registered for it, and I heard that the RSVPs kind of went out late this today, but each calendar that you download also has the meeting link, so that's also one way to reach it. But of course, the recording will be there if you need it. And I checked with marketing; these recordings and slides will be on the website for up to a year and maybe even longer than that. But you have the option of downloading it if you need to, store it somewhere. And then the way to get to that page, if you don't remember, is that if you search Transformation Tuesdays and then click on entire site and then search, then you'll find this pretty easily. So as always, there is a Q&A button. Q&A area that doesn't really have a chat, but you can use it as a chat. Please scroll through the questions that have already been asked to upvote or like the ones that you, which are similar to yours, and then we'll go in that order of priority. And so for future events, very important for future events, please subscribe to our newsletter. We send out a monthly newsletter, and there's like a special section for alumni. And we have a lot of career resources. We publish when our programs are open. We often have stories of past alumni, instructors, advisory board members, and then we also talk about our events over there. So please subscribe to our newsletter, or just keep coming back to our website to see what new events are there. All right, Matt, final time.
Final time. Now that we finally got it all down pat, we're going to be wrapping things up. Well, thanks, PU. Thanks, everyone, for coming out on this sunny night, at least if you're in Seattle. I know there's some people dialing in from other locations. I suspect many of you have sat through some of the other webinars we've done in this series, but for those I haven't met, my name's Matt Youngquist. I've founded a company about 15 years ago called Career Horizons, where basically my day-to-day job is coaching people on job hunting and trying to give them the most practical, useful advice I can on how to play this game, get ahead in the workforce and all that. Fell into the field many, many years ago, right out of University of Washington when I graduated in the early 90s. And it's just something I have a lot of passion about for two reasons. One, I don't think the average person gets a lot of formal training on job hunting and careers. I think it's this important life skill that, many of us just have to wing it and figure out as we go. And on top of that, the market's changing so much. I mean, I spend all day long doing this and I can barely keep up. So I don't know how people with a real job or, a real career, would track all this stuff. So thanks to you, Dub, and all the folks behind the scenes who put these together. Tonight, we're going to be focusing our time on interview preparation and strategy to complement what we've already talked about in terms of resumes, LinkedIn usage, and stuff like that. As PU said, all the slides I'm going to go through will be available for download, so you're welcome to take notes, but you'll have the slide deck if you need it, as well as a recording. So let's go ahead and dive in. As always, throw your questions in the Q&A box. I will do my best to answer them as we go, and then we'll have time at the end of the session, a good 20 to 30 minutes, when I will just dive in and see what's left that I haven't responded to. Okay, so first thing I'm going to talk about, a few opening remarks. So yeah, interviewing, I don't necessarily think people are born being good interviewers or bad interviewers, but there's definitely people who naturally just are more comfortable, more confident, more extroverted than some people who are more introverted. So certainly I think most of us have sort of a baseline level of comfort with interviewing, but what I can tell you is interviewing is a skill set. It's a lot of people, I think, again, think you're sort of born with it, but with practice, you can definitely get better. Now, I don't know if you could take someone who is really shy. Well, I'm sure anything's possible, but you may not be able to go from a D- to an A+ without a ton of practice. But even if we knock you up one letter grade or two in terms of practice, that may be enough to turn the tide and get that job you really want. So the funny thing, and I'm glad so many of you are here tonight, because of all the things I work with people on career-wise, one of the least common is interview prep, because a lot of people always tell me, oh, that's not my problem, just get me the interview. I've always done great at interviews, but sometimes these people haven't interviewed in 10 or 15 or more years. And I kind of question, well, has the market changed? Is there more competition? Are you as good at this as you think you are? I hope they are. But the point is, a lot of people, I don't think, practice or prepare enough, okay? The second thing is, of course, we never know or rarely know if you are the most talented or qualified person for a given job. You don't usually know who you're up against. It is not that hard to make sure you're the most prepared person. Because again, I find that chronically a lot of job hunters just, maybe put in 20 minutes, an hour of time prepping for an interview. But if you really look at an interview the way my mentor taught me, who is a top salesperson, he said, let's say it's a $70,000 job, and let's say the average tenure is 3 years. He would basically say that's a $210,000 sales opportunity you're walking into. How would a salesperson prepare for a meeting like that? And they would spend hours and hours prepping to close that deal. Again, most job hunters don't look at it like that. A lot of people just kind of waltz in and improvise, and I think that's somewhat risky. But given how few people prepare thoroughly, I think with preparation you can usually ensure you're, if not the most prepared, you're one of them. Just takes a little homework and effort. Okay. Next thing I would say is, yeah, there is no foolproof formula I can teach you. You're not going to win them all. Sometimes the deck is stacked. Sometimes you go in and a job isn't real, or they just change their mind and reclassify the job. Sometimes there's internal candidates that is just going to be next to impossible to beat. Or the chemistry, you walk in and you just immediately have bad chemistry. If you look like someone's ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, there may be no way to overcome that. So, you've got to give yourself a little bit of a break and say you're not going to win them all. Sometimes, things are just happening behind the scenes. But again, I also see lots of cases where I think people probably could have gotten the job and they just weren't quite prepared. Or my clients will say, oh, I walked in and I just got stumped by a few questions I should have been ready for. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about here tonight. Okay, and just to kind of brace you, I'm going to cover a lot of stuff. I think the official name of this webinar was Advanced Interview Preparation, which begs the question, well, what's advanced and what's beginning? Almost every book out there is full of interviewing advice, like here's how you answer all these questions and take a shower before the interview and stand up straight and all this stuff. So I've really tried to pull out, I think, some of my, again, things that are more advanced, or hopefully some tips you haven't heard a whole bunch of times before. But as I do that, I would also say I'm going to throw a lot at you. So I'd be surprised if someone used each and every tip I'm going to tell you tonight. But my hope is, even if a few of them really stick with you, there'll be enough, again, to give you an edge out there. Okay. All right, let's go from there. I had a question come in already. It was kind of based on last week's, I guess it would have been the resume seminar last time, and I'll just get this one out of the way. They said, should you have your marriage status in your email address, like Mr. or Mrs. Jane Doe? Generally, I would say no. I don't think it's necessarily, I don't know if it's fatal, but I don't think most people would put a Mr. or a Mrs. or anything like that in an email address. So that's the answer. Okay. All right, back to interviewing. So the first slide, let's talk about the kind of prep you can do on the company and the job before you actually show up for that interview, okay? In the immortal words of Abraham Lincoln there at the bottom, the famous quote about, if I have to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend most of my time sharpening my axe. It's that same idea of just doing this prep work ahead of time so that you're fully prepared when the interview comes. So, this first tip, most of you know a little bit about. It used to be, back 10, 20 years ago, it was like, wow, I didn't even know you could do this. But I would imagine most of you are familiar with Glassdoor.com. That's the most famous site that has company reviews, companies ratings, where you can go and say, oh, I'm going to interview with Tableau software, and let's read what a bunch of people had to say about that company, good or bad. And a lot of them also have interview pages that talk about what those companies' interview approaches typically are. So I would imagine most of you have been to Glassdoor, but I just want to call your attention. There's several other sites similar to Glassdoor. There's one, as you see there, called comparably.com. There's one called careerbliss.com. And then there's Indeed.com, which so many people are familiar with Indeed, and they use Indeed, right, to find job leads. So if I go here on Indeed, you can see kind of the standard job lead page and all that. But a lot of people miss this little tab at the top that says company reviews. So you might pop in there, you know, and any company that you're getting ready for an interview, just run a search on it, see it's in the database, see how it's rated as an employer. And then you can go to reviews and read a whole bunch of stuff of what people say about working there. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I already know what some of you are going to type me, which is, should I trust all these reviews on these sites? Well, of course not. You know, some people just have an axe to grind. Some people are just negative. So like anything else, any other reviews in life, you know, take it with a grain of salt. If you were to read 30 reviews on a company, you know, there's probably some people who say it's the best company that ever existed and some who say it's an absolute nightmare. The truth is somewhere in the middle. So what I would do is look, and what I'd mostly be looking for in these reviews is common themes. Like if 3 out of 4 people say something like, it's hard to get promoted at this company, or they don't pay as much as most companies, or there's not good work-life balance, that's when I start paying attention and assuming there might be some truth there if multiple people are saying it. But if someone just goes off on a, you know, on a crusade and says, you know, this place is terrible, I probably wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. Okay. So just be aware that there's more than just Glassdoor. There's a couple sites that have this kind of information. It tends to be for companies of a certain size, not little bitty companies, but definitely is something you should check out. The second point here on prepping is I see a lot of people who research the job, like they'll study the job description, but they don't do enough research on the company and what the company's all about. In most cases, you know, I would be trying to get answers to questions like, what's this company's business model? What are their values? How do they actually make money? What competitors are they worried about? So just to give you a quick example of that, you know, I had someone not long ago that had an interview coming up with Uber, and I'm assuming we all know the car, you know, rideshare company. And so this person had done some research, and I just asked them, you know, the day before the interview, who does Uber compete with? And their answer, like I'm sure most of you, they said, they compete with Lyft and they compete with taxi cabs. And I sort of jokingly said, well, gosh, I think even my 6th grade son knows that. So I tried to point out that's not going to impress an employer much if you just know as much about the company as everybody else on the street. But what I told them is I said, Uber's got dozens of competitors. There's all these little rideshare companies nipping at their heels, the rideshare.com, Mr. Mustache, on and on. And I said, with just a little bit more research into that space and that product ecosystem, you could drop some information in that interview. Hey, are you folks worried about this new company? Or how does Uber differentiate itself from Lyft? Or questions that I think would just make you seem smarter about what this company does and what their space is. Even if you're an accountant or someone who's not in marketing, I think it just impresses employers if you get it, if you understand kind of what their company does to make money. Now, big companies like Amazon and Microsoft, I mean, generally most of us know what they do, but if you're interviewing like a certain division, you know, Kindle and Amazon, you know, then you might do some research into electronic book readers, you know, what are the latest things and all that. So I just mentioned that because I don't see a lot of people spend much time on that. They get so focused on just the job description, they kind of miss the big picture of, you know, what does this company do and what do they pride themselves on and who are they doing battle with? Because every company pretty much has somebody or multiple companies that they're trying to, you know, capture some share from. Okay. And then last but not least, my favorite one on this slide, one I've never seen talked about anywhere else, is what I noticed a long time ago is when you really study most job advertisements, you'll sometimes see some very emotional, unusual, creative, or repeated language in them. Okay. So like, you know, the average job ad, they're going to go to their human resource department. They're going to pull out an old advertisement and it's full of cliches and it's all very standard. But then, you know, in a lot of companies, the manager or whoever's hiring is going to say, you know, the last time we hired for this position, the person couldn't get along with the finance people, or they couldn't deal with ambiguity, or they weren't, I don't know, they weren't outgoing enough with our customers. So what happens is they stick in some new language in the ad, and it's usually got these kind of emotional, creative, you can just tell it's different from the rest of the language, especially if you're looking at lots of jobs in your field and you go, now there's something that I haven't seen in a lot of these other jobs. And what that information can tell you is it can give you a tip off of what's really important to that company, because almost every interview, there's just a couple hot buttons they really care about. I mean, they're going to ask you for 20 things in the job description, but we all know, like if you know, whether you buy a house or buy something else, you know, there's usually a few really key buying points you want. So let me show you an example of this. If I jump off my slides and I go back to the internet, and I just looked up a project manager job on Indeed right before the webinar started, okay? So I picked this random job at Denny Mountain Media for a digital project manager, and I pulled it up and I started looking at it. Okay, and most of it, like I said, it's all important. You should read all of it and be ready for it. But what I was really looking at is I go down and I typically focus most on where they say, what qualifications do you have? Or these people said it kind of creatively. We'd love to hear from you if you have. In other words, they're saying, here's what we want our ideal people to bring to the table. So when I studied this, now I do a lot more of this than most of you, but I was just, again, looking for interesting language. And a lot of the stuff in here is pretty standard. Okay, they want agile development, they want content management experience, but a few things I picked out here, you know, this one's kind of middle of the road, is, you know, when I looked in here, and for starters, I said, well, here they say self-motivated person with the ability to work in a deadline-driven environment. Okay, that's not terribly unusual, but then down here, they say it again. They say self-motivating yet again, and then down below, they say be committed to deadlines. So 3 times in these 8 or 10 bullets, they talk about self-motivation and deadlines. It doesn't take a rocket science to say, maybe they're having problems with that. Maybe the last person was not self-motivated and needed the manager to kind of ride their rear end constantly or crack the whip on them. And this is a cry for help. They're saying, you'd better be good at this. We're really, really in need of someone who can hit deadlines. So I would just file that away and go, I think this issue is probably extra important to them. I would also go up here and say, they ask for listening and communication skills, but they don't just stop there. They say what kind. They specifically say communicate clearly with both business and technical audiences, okay? So I'm kind of like, the fact that they called that out, they didn't just say the standard good communication skills. I'm like, have they had a problem with people who could not explain technology to business audiences or vice versa? And I'd kind of flag that as that might be extra important to them, okay? So on and on and on. So I'm just looking for little tip-offs like this. Probably the last one that caught my eye was when they said, proven ability to unite teams. I mean, that's something you don't see in every job description. You'll see them ask for collaboration and team leadership, but to unite teams is a very specific word choice that I'm thinking someone thought about that. And obviously the takeaway is these people probably have teams that are not working well together, or they're fighting with each other. So what I would do if I was interviewing for this job is I wouldn't assume I'm right, but I would have a pretty strong hunch these are some hot buttons, and I would walk into that interview and I would either be upfront about that, and I would ask them questions like, hey, I get the sense there might be some issues with teams not working together or not being on the same page. Can you tell me more about that? And see if I get a reaction. See if they just start going, oh my gosh, we're having this problem. We need someone who can build harmony. And boy, I just won them over, or I really got them excited. I also don't have to tell them I picked up on that, and I could just make sure my answers speak to these qualities. So if I don't want to tip off that I read that, I could just say, you know, what are your greatest strengths, blah, blah, blah. And one of my strengths is I'm really good at bringing teams together, making sure they see eye to eye, rescuing troubled team relationships. And again, that might be enough that you see them kind of start drooling because they get so excited. Oh, we found someone who can fix that big problem we have. So I know I covered that quick, but it's just a little detective work with these advertisements. Some of them are really sanitized, big companies, maybe there's not much there, but always look for some unusual word choices, because I think it can tell you sort of what's going on behind the scenes or what's the backstory of some jobs, which gives you a little bit of an advantage in terms of what to sell to them, okay? A couple people asked some questions. Some large companies do a general interview for a type role. You don't know what department or product. I mean, that's a tough one. Those aren't very common. But if a company just basically says, come in, we're going to interview, and we're not going to tell you what the job is, there's honestly the only two things I can tell you that would be different than anything else I'm going to talk about. One is double down and know even more about point number 2 here, the company, their business model, because the only way you can impress them is knowing more about their company, because there's not a job you can study. The second thing is a lot of companies, when they do that, is a lot of companies want you to have some goals. So if they're not going to tell you, we want you to consider the marketing job or this job, they might ask you, what's your perfect job? What do you want to do? And they might put more emphasis on you having a goal. So I would certainly be ready to go in and talk about what problems you like to solve, what departments, what jobs would interest you. You might be expected to have more focus there. Okay. Someone also noted on that last ad, if I had more time, I was going to mention that. But yeah, even where they say a high level of ingenuity, good catch, that's a fairly interesting word choice. So I would think, are they looking for creative solutions to problems? Are there people who are just status quo, solving things the way they've always been solved? So yeah, that's exactly the kinds of things we're looking for. See if you can pick those out of there. Okay. And then someone else said they are on the, I'm assuming, the autism spectrum, and so they get really anxious, need a quiet environment for the interview. Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of people who have situations and issues like that. I mean, obviously, Mary, it depends a lot on exactly, what degree we're talking. But I think in general, some of you may disagree, but I think if you have an issue like that and you can communicate honestly with the company and say, hey, would you be able to accommodate this? I would hope and think a lot of companies would, not only because they don't want to get accused of discrimination or not compliance, but I think some honestly want you to give it your best shot. So if they had to arrange a quiet room or something like that, if that's bad enough that you're worried about it, as it sounds, I would certainly ask an interview and try to do it in a really positive light. Just say, on the job, I do great. That's not really a problem. But when it comes to interviewing, it's just, I have where I need a quieter environment. Can that be arranged? And see if they can accommodate you. Okay. Okay. And someone else made a last point there, which is good. If there's questions that you think it may signal a red flag, a yellow flag, maybe there's an issue there, absolutely ask questions, nice questions. Don't be rude. But let's say you asked about teams not getting along and the person got a look on their face like it's World War III in here, then you absolutely would say, well, I may still try to get the job offer, but would I take the job if I'm seeing some really challenges? So that's definitely another benefit of doing that kind of reconnaissance. Okay. All right, let's move on from there. So there's some preparation stuff. The next slide is I sort of jokingly call 4th grade level of interviewing. Not that you don't want to do this and not this is bad, but to me, this is so basic that anyone who's not doing this isn't really trying. And this is what the vast majority of interview books really focus on, is just here's all the common questions that companies tend to ask. Some books have, 101 best interview questions, and they basically just tell you to go read all these questions and try to memorize answers to them. I don't think that's a really smart way to prep, because you're never going to memorize 100 answers to questions, nor are most companies going to ask you more than 3 of those questions. So the ones I would focus on, I'm just going to go ahead and pull these all up. I think the most common questions by far I've seen or heard reported by my clients are, tell me about yourself at the start of the interview. Greatest strengths, greatest weaknesses. A lot of companies ask that, or they ask some form of it. Why should I hire you? What sets you apart? I mean, they can ask it different ways, but they're still getting at that same issue. A lot of will ask about how much money you're looking for. They might ask what interests you in this job, or why do you want to work for our company? And then lastly, if anyone's not working or unemployed, they might say, what happened at your last company, or why are you available? So the 3 bullets on this page to me represent the absolute softball questions that any serious interviewer should be thinking about, practice, have a strategy, and be ready to go in and answer these questions. Because like I said, I think this is the lowest bar, we have to clear. Now, the funny thing about these questions is I can pretty much promise you that if your answer to these questions didn't take much thought and you think, oh, I could just wing an answer, I can almost promise you it's a mediocre answer at best. Because the thing of all the interviews I've done, and I would imagine some of you have been in managers, you will find that obvious answers, the common answers everyone thinks of, they get so boring because you've heard them 100 times. So if I have a leader and I say, what is your leadership style? And they say, I'm a servant leader. I lead by example. I manage by objective. I just kind of yawn and go, well, that's not very original. I've heard that a million times. If I say, what are your strengths? And you say, I'm detail oriented, I'm good with people, and I'm good at analysis, again, you're boring me because those are probably the common answers every single other person is going to say. So this one, don't blow past this. Your goal on these questions is to anticipate them and really try to come up with some original answers that they probably haven't heard from every other candidate, or at the very least take a quality and come up with an interesting soundbite around it. And I'll give you an example or two of that. So let me just give you, I'm sure some of you have questions about how to answer these. So let me give you a few tips on answering these specific questions. So a lot of interviews start by just saying, tell me about yourself. And that is your moment to shine, because the first 2 minutes of an interview, every study ever done on this says the first 2 minutes count huge. Like it's almost make or break, where if you blow it in the first 2 minutes, you almost never recover. And if you ace it in the first 2 minutes, pretty good odds things are going to go well. So the one thing you don't want to do is repeat your resume. Do not start reading off, back in 1993, I got my degree, and in 1995, I went to Microsoft, and da-da-da. Within 10 seconds, you're going to see them start losing interest, because it's just boring. They've got all that data on your resume. Plus, that's what most people do, and it doesn't show much proactivity or thoughtfulness on your part as a candidate. So as my bullet says there, you want to build an answer. It's not that you can't talk a little bit about the past, but you want to focus mostly on your strengths, your passions, and your goals. So you might, for example, talk for 2 minutes. You have my resume, Mr. or Miss Interviewer. As you can see, I spent some time at Microsoft. I then went to Expedia, and then I went back and got my MBA or whatever. But then say the strengths I think I brought to almost all of those jobs, or what people have said about me, or what has allowed me, the consistent things I think I've demonstrated are, and give them like 3 strengths. Like get right out in front and tell them the 3 things you want them to know about you. What are those things? Okay. You might talk about your passions, what I'm really focused on, what I love doing. Get some emotion in there. I love taking spreadsheets and finding ways to automate them and save tons of manual hours that companies used to have to spend. Show them that you get excited about your career. Talk about your goals. So it's the emotional stuff that really stands out here, not just reading the facts of your resume. So go ahead and talk about some of your past and your future, but try to talk about it from a standpoint of, again, strengths and passions, not just repeating facts, because a lot of people do that because it's safe. And again, it just sort of bores them. You don't want to go more than about 3 minutes at the absolute max. I would shoot for about 2 minutes, but you also don't want to be too short. If you only talk for 30 seconds, a lot of interviewers ask this question because they're nervous, right? They don't like interviewing. So they're basically saying, you talk for a while and squirm while I get comfortable. So if you only talk for 30 seconds, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's all you've got? I have to come up with another question already? So you're a big topic. You've easily got 2 to 3 minutes about your passion, your goals that you could get in there, but it does take a little thinking and practice, okay? So hopefully that answers that question about time. How do you answer greatest weakness? The first thing you don't want to do is be too cute about that. There's so many books or people who try to give a strength and pretend it's a weakness, right? I mean, that's like a high school trick. So if I ask you for a weakness, I'm really, in most cases, trying to see if you're mature, if you're self-aware, if you will own up to something you're not great at that you have to work on or work a little harder at than the next person. So if I'm doing mock interviews and someone says, my weakness is I'm a perfectionist, just for fun, I look right back at them and I say, oh, so you want to make more mistakes. That's what you're saying? And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, well, if being a perfectionist is a weakness, you're telling me you'd like to make a lot more mistakes. And they get all flustered, and I sort of tell them, see, that's how silly those kind of answers are. So what I want you to do is you can't pick something that's a job killer, like I'm a salesperson and I don't like people, or I'm an accountant and I'm not good at details. I mean, you can't pick anything that's too big, too critical to the job. But if you think about, what are some things you're not naturally good at? Some people, you could say, you know, one of my issues, I'm very analytical, so sometimes it takes me longer to make decisions than other people, and I've had to really work on that. Or you could say, I'm really trusting, and what I've learned in my career is if you're managing people and delegating, you can't always just trust them to do everything. I had some people take advantage of that. So I've had to be better about setting boundaries. The thing is you really want to get credit again for being honest with yourself and them about a real issue and just telling them, here's how I've worked on it. I might need a manager who can, you know, help me compensate for that, and try to get some points for authenticity. Don't treat it like you have to trick them with the strength or not answer it or something like that. Okay. So weakness is one. If they ask you about salary, I see a lot of books tell you to avoid that question and try to dodge it. I don't know why. I just don't think that's a good strategy. I think recruiters, you know, if you say something like, you know, how much money do you want? And you turn it around and say, well, how much are you guys thinking of? Or let's talk about that later. I'm not comfortable talking about that now. I think it could potentially really hurt your chemistry. So the funny thing is I just tell people, act like you're worth it. If you get really defensive, do your homework, look at salary sites like payscale.com and Glassdoor, and don't give them an exact number, but give them a range. Say, salary, that's a fair question. Obviously, every company has different variables and benefits, but the general range that seems fair for this kind of work that I've seen other companies offering is 15 to 20 an hour, or 60,000 to 75,000, just depending on benefits. So that's my rough ballpark, but I have a certain amount of flexibility just depending on the exact offer and what the benefits are. So my point is, I want you to answer their question with a range. I don't want you to avoid it, because I think recruiters kind of roll their eyes and just say, oh, stop playing games and just give me some sense so we can move on. Now, others may disagree, but I talk to a lot of recruiters and they all tell me they're not trying to trick you. They're just trying not to waste your time and theirs by talking about a job that's way off base from what you would want to make or what they'd want to pay. So just give them a big range and just say, this is the rough answer. And then, we're just trying to keep the interview alive, in other words. Okay. And then lastly, on that second bullet, it says, what interests you about the job or company? It goes right back to my statement. If it's something you didn't have to think about, it's too obvious. If you say to Amazon, I'd love to work for Amazon because I've used your products for years and I love your service, guess what? You sound like the last 9 people who interviewed. If you go to Starbucks and say, I've always loved your coffee, guess what? You sound like the last 20 people who answered that question. So really dig deep and find something more interesting about the company, their values, their mission, something you've heard about them. Pick something from the job description that's really specific. Like, what I loved about your job description is you said you wanted someone with ingenuity, and that's something I've always prided myself on, is creativity. So that really drew me and makes me interested in this job, or something. But again, if you think a lot of other people would say it, you're just not going to get any real credit for it. So you got to think a little harder about that stuff. As just a joking extreme, if you were interviewing at Starbucks and said, I actually prefer Tully's coffee, not Starbucks, but that doesn't matter because I think I could knock this job out of the park, I think you'd actually be more memorable than someone who just says, I love Starbucks, like most people. But I'm not saying to do that necessarily, but you get my point. Someone asked, what is talking for too long? I would say in most interviews, anything more than about 2 minutes to 3 minutes is too long. If you start telling war stories or going beyond 3 minutes, you're going to see they lose interest. So sometimes you got to train yourself. A lot of people get nervous and they just keep talking and they just keep adding to their answers, and it just gets to be too much. So 2 to 3 minutes is what we're shooting for. And as far as the salary question, someone asked, should you tell them what you made at the last job? I wouldn't recommend that either, because neither is that any of their business. But in some cases, you're not looking to just make a lateral move. I would still keep it open, and I would say something like, the range I'm targeting is $50,000 to $60,000, which is comparable to what I made in my last job, or is comparable to what I'm making now. I just wouldn't give them an exact figure, because if you give them an exact figure, you kind of pin yourself down. There are jobs you would probably take $10,000 less if the benefits were incredible, and jobs you wouldn't do for $100,000 because they're horrible. So you got to give yourself some wiggle room on salary, and that's all employers are really looking for. Okay. All right, I'll try to come back to some of those in a bit, but I want to kind of keep plowing on here. The last one I have on the slide is if you're unemployed, one of the questions people worry about the most is why are you available, or what happened in your last job? So the funny thing about that, in all the years asking people that question, most people get really defensive and you can just tell they don't want to talk about it. They give like a 5-second answer. They'll say, there was a layoff and I was impacted. And what I always tell them when they say that to me is I say, what part of that answer makes me want to hire you more? And they always look like I'm crazy and they say, well, nothing, but what else could I say? So I don't know all of your situations, but I'm going to tell you my script and maybe it resonates with some of you. In almost every job layoff or resignation or termination, there's almost always something positive you could say. So I tell people, start with some positives. Hey, I was with Expedia for 3 years. It was a great run. I learned a ton about project management, worked with some great people. I mean, start with some positives. Then tell them like one reason why your job went away and try to spin it or make it the most positive reason. Unfortunately, a month ago, my position, like quite a few others, was eliminated due to COVID, and just the travel industry's been hit hard. So, 10% of the workforce was eliminated. Or you could say, if maybe you were terminated, you say, I've had so many great jobs. This last one, I just didn't see quite eye to eye with the boss. We had sort of different ideas about where the company was going. So, we decided it was probably best to part ways, but that's the only time that's happened. Sometimes if it's a really tough situation, you just got to kind of own up to it. But at the end of that answer, go back to being positive. That being said, I understand the reasons for the decision. Yeah, it stung at first, but I'm actually kind of excited to move on, take some of what I learned at Expedia, find a new place to use those project management skills. And I have excellent references if you need them. I don't know if that's true or not in each of your cases. But see, my point is almost everyone I say that to is like, oh yeah, that's all true. So you can usually put some positives in that answer to surround the tough part if you think about it. It's just that most people don't naturally do that because they're still a little, grieving, or they're just still really defensive about it. But you want to show that manager, I've dealt with it. I've rolled with the punches. Things happen and I'm ready to move on, and I'm positive, because that's what people want to hire, right? They don't want to hire someone with baggage or someone who they sense something went on there because the person doesn't want to talk about. I mean, they don't know. Did you steal from the company? Was there an affair? So you got to come out and say, here's what happened, but here's all this positive language around it of what I got out of that job. And that usually softens the blow a bit. Okay. All right. A couple other questions have come in. Flip side of the salary question, why is it a secret? Yeah, it's strange how companies deal with salary. They don't usually post it. If you really don't want to waste time and you're fairly confident, you can ask them, especially if you think you're pretty marketable, you can ask them up front before, flip it around before we get too far along. Can I ask what you pay for this job or what your salary range is? A lot of people wouldn't be comfortable doing that, but if you're comfortable, ask them, see what they say. Yeah, there is certainly lots of studies that say that there's some gender differences between salary. Women might be more shooting low ball or lower, men might be more aggressive. There's probably truth to that. So honestly, I think, again, just, whatever gender you might be, try to do the research on what is the typical salary range for these kinds of jobs. And that should be the range you give them. Shoot for the midpoint, give yourself some wiggle room. But yeah, just be aware, I guess, if the studies are correct, that if you're female, you might have a little more tendency to undersell yourself, and you might just, force yourself to raise that dollar figure a little. I think there's probably some truth to that. If you get a negative vibe at the start of an interview, on it, that's a great point. Like I said, the chemistry must just be off. The person might be having a bad day, and that's just all you can do. The only thing I can tell you is be yourself. I mean, be positive, be yourself. And if at the end of the day you just don't click, that's probably for the right reasons and you wouldn't want to work for them. But sometimes, it's not your issue. They're having a bad day. Something happened in their personal life. They're human. So just don't let it phase you. Just give good answers, be positive, do everything you trained and practiced to do, and just trust that if it's meant to be, that'll work. Not much else you can do if you get a real negative vibe. If they're rude to you, if they're really just nasty, I would walk out of the interview. It doesn't happen much, but I've had a few cases where people just said they were treated really poorly, and I would just end the interview right there. Okay. The next question, behavioral, we're going to talk all about that on the next slide. So I've got that one answered in a second. And someone mentioned that Washington State did pass a law where employers cannot ask or demand your current salary, which is great. I can't remember if that's all states in the country, but a lot of them have passed that law where you don't have to and they can't ask what you made in your last job. I thought someone said something else on, anyway, so that point is correct. So don't, I guess, worry about that anymore, that they can ask that. But they'll still say, what are your requirements? What are your needs? So they can ask you to speak to your salary needs. They just can't ask you what you made in the past. So you will still want to be prepared for that question. Okay. Last but not least, and we'll move on, and like these kind of relate. If you have a long period of unemployment, which could even be, as someone asked, if you're a stay-at-home parent for many years, as I said in the last class, I guess it was, I think you need to explain that gap in the most positive way you can. So try not to be defensive about it. Remember, they invited you to the interview. So if that gap was fatal, if they didn't think you could do the job, they probably wouldn't have asked you in. So I would just be prepared to say, hey, I'm going to talk about this later too. Glad you brought that question up. What happened there is I made a conscious choice after a very positive career to take a few years off to raise a young family. I did it. It was great. We got the little buggers up into where they're now more self-sufficient, and now I'm ready to resume my career. And I actually I feel like, like I'm starting my career again with so much energy because I'm so excited to get back in the professional world or whatever. I mean, you don't lay it on too thick. But my point is, don't let them make you apologize for it. Don't get defensive around it. Explain it with confidence. Here's what I did. It was intentional. And now, I've used that time to train, or I did some volunteer work, or if there's anything you could throw in, some consulting work. And now I'm just resuming and trying to get back in my career. I mean, that's about all you can really do there. But be ready for it because those questions will come up. Okay. All right, let's move on from there. The next slide talks about behavioral interviewing questions, which someone asked about. Behavioral interviewing is a really fancy name for just the really common fad now where companies say, give us examples of things. So there, at some point, a bunch of human resource people convinced every company, don't trust people's answers. If you just say, are you good at delegating, or are you good with ambiguity? Well, everyone's going to say yes. They would be silly to say no, they won't get the job. But they said the best way to test if someone's really good at something is make them tell you a story or give you an example. I guess a compulsive liar could probably pass that test, but this is a very common thing most interviews are going to have you do. The public sector does it a ton. Amazon does it a ton. So all you can do there is all of us need like about a half dozen of our best stories. You got to think about of all the stuff you've done in your career, and maybe once in a while, it could be things from your personal life. If you have some proud accomplishments from your personal life, but you got to really get those stories under your belt. Think about them, maybe write them out or write some bullets out. And just the worst thing would be into an interview and just not having any story. You just didn't think about it. So you just get blanked out and stumped. So you want to think of those stories, practice them. And then what you also want to do is any one story can probably say 5 or 10 different things about you. So you might say, 3 years ago, I launched a new project at, I don't know, Starbucks to launch a new beverage, and you might say, well, what could that story say about me? It could show that I'm very organized. It could show I'm good at working across departmental lines. It could show I'm innovative and come up with new ideas. So my point is, you don't need 20 different stories for 20 different questions. You need like 5 or 6 stories where you've thought about what you could use them to demonstrate, because any one success story has multiple things that went into it, okay? And then last but not least, you want those stories to be 2 to 3 minutes. And I'm sure almost everyone or most of you have heard of the famous way to prep those stories, which is called the STAR method, S-T-A-R. Now, I'm not a fan of the STAR method because I think it's overly complicated. So, STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. So you'll read a lot of books or have companies say, break your examples down into situation, task, action, result. I think it's simpler to do PAR. What was the problem you faced? What actions did you take to fix it? And what was the happy ending or the result? So it's up to you. But, to me, trying to put yours in that PAR format so you have a good beginning, a good middle, and a good end really makes for a better example, because there's some structure to it and it's not just rambling for 5 minutes kind of thing. So with behavioral questions, I mean, that's really, it takes practice. You have to think of those stories, you got to pin them down, you got to think of what they could say about you, and you got to practice them, and you got to work on that PAR format or something like it so that you have a beginning, a middle, and end, and they're not boring, right? Put some drama in there. Don't just say, I once worked on a project to launch a new beverage. Say, 3 years ago, my boss, Judy, came into my office with her hair on fire, and she said, Tully's just launched this great new beverage and they're stealing market share and we got to come up with a way to beat them. I mean, talk dramatically to make the interviewer feel like they were there with you. I know that's a lot easier for some than others, but if you're really struggling with storytelling, if you're just not good at this, I'd recommend like Toastmasters clubs or anything that'll teach you to be more comfortable with public speaking, because that's really the only way to get over that hump. But for those of you kind of middle of the road, again, just practice that. And one last tip on this is anytime in a job ad, you see the words demonstrated or proven. So if there's bullets that say demonstrated ability to deal with ambiguity, proven ability to influence across departments, that's almost a guaranteed tip-off. They're going to ask you for an example, because that code language, demonstrated or proven, is basically them saying we're not going to take your word for it. You've got to give us an example. So if you're trying to figure out what qualities to prep these stories on, I would look for that language, demonstrated or proven, and be ready for those. Okay. What do we be asked here? Let's see. If you have a bunch of interviews in a loop or something, should you present different stories to each interview? I mean, in a perfect world, you'd mix the stories up, but there may not be that many stories, or you may just not be that good on your feet. I don't think it's that bad a thing to repeat the same story. It's not going to come out the same way every time, of course. It's going to sound different every time. So if you're really advanced and can have that many stories, great, but I wouldn't feel bad if you kind of repeat the same great shining story, because most of us, yeah, there's a few really proud moments. We don't have 100 of them. So I don't think that's a problem. If someone asked if you get stumped, how do you recover? I mean, that's happened to all of us. I don't think you can do this more than once, but I think maybe one time you can say, you know what, you kind of stumped me on that one, or I'm just having a moment or drawing a blank. Could I get back to you on that one? Or could you ask me that question again? Or could I go, think about that, maybe send you some answers tonight? I mean, just telling them they got you and you're not coming up with a good answer is probably better than just BSing them or just talking for the sake of talking. So I think you get like one get out of jail free card. You can be honest and just say, but if you do much more than that, that usually signals more of a lack of preparation. Okay. Someone asked about personality tests. If they ask you to take a personality test, you pretty much have to take it. I don't think you should try to game it or trick it or anything. People ask me that just because it's not that these are perfect tests, but the psychologists who invent them, they put little booby traps in there to tell if someone's kind of fabricating their answers. I don't know how well those work. But the most important thing is if you're not real and authentic, you probably won't be a fit for the job. So I'm not personally a big fan of personality testing and hiring. I think it's got some real danger issues. But if a company does it, it's just one of the many things they're going to have you do. What I do find is a lot of companies still end up deciding based on the interview, and they just use the personality test to justify whatever they decide. Oh, we want to hire this person. Let's talk ourselves into the personality test matching, or we don't want to hire them and let's blame the test. So I wish there was more. There's so many of those, and I just don't think there's much you can do about them other than take them at face value and roll with it. Someone asked about the STAR method. Yeah, as I mentioned a second ago, Liz, yeah, I don't personally use the STAR method. I recommend PAR. It's the same thing though. It's just STAR has one extra step. And I still don't understand a clear distinction between situation and task, which are the first two pieces of the STAR method. But yeah, if you want to use the STAR method, go for it. Google STAR method, and there's more websites, and you can imagine, that talk about that. Okay, the other questions that are coming in are more about like lead generation and stuff, so I'm going to hold off on those for a second. 2 to 3 minute story is actually, someone said, is that too short? I mean, honestly, if you do practice interviewing, 3 minutes is a fair amount of time. I'm not saying it's fatal if one story goes to 4 minutes or 5 minutes, but if this interview is only half an hour long and I can only get 3 or 4 questions in because someone's giving me 6-minute answers, that becomes a problem. So that they can always ask you to give more detail. So I would always say 2 minutes or so, 3 minutes. And then if they want more details, they'll ask for them. But it's more dangerous to give longer answers, because then they could get bored or just go, is this person ever going to stop so I can ask my next question? So that's the generally accepted length on that. Let's see. Someone mentioned they've had a recruiter from Amazon expect different stories. I mean, I can't speak to everyone at Amazon or they all expect that, but like I said, if you have them, great, but that's asking a lot of candidates. And that would mean that those interviewers have to really be talking and coordinating closely. What are they going to sit there and review everything you answered and tell it to the next person? A little of that happens, but anyway, like I said, maybe at Amazon you go the extra mile on that, but that is not something I've commonly heard at other companies. Okay, let's move on from there. Fourth question, fourth slide. I'm really big on this one, and this is more about the rapport issue in interviews. My mentor in the 90s, I've talked about a few times, he was a top salesperson. And so much of my formative training on career coaching was from the standpoint of interviewing is sales. You are selling a solution to a company, and that hiring manager across the desk is your customer. So the things I always stress to people, number one, I know this is going to rock some of your worlds. You might disagree, or you might just say this is much harder to do than to say. But I tell people, if you can go to an interview and let go of the outcome, you're not there to get the job at all costs. You're not there to put all this pressure and give perfect answers. You are there to help understand, or to focus on, what do these people need done? What's working? What's not working? Whether it's me or somebody else, I want to understand what my pain points are of this customer and just get a really good picture of what they need done here. Maybe I'm the right person to do it. Maybe I'm not. Because that attitude puts your focus not on you, but on your customer, right? And what their needs are. And that's so powerful. Now, you have to be pretty prepared to do that, because if you're scrambling to remember everything about yourself, it's going to be hard to put your attention across the desk. But that's why I'm stressing preparation so much. Okay, if you think it's about a test where you got to give the perfect answer, again, I think we've all probably seen this. It is not often, or not even usually, the most qualified person on paper who gets the job offer, because chemistry and rapport counts a ton. It counts probably at least half. So I see people who go in there and they're robotic. It's like it's like a legal deposition. Question, answer. I give you my answer and I stop and I look at you. Okay, question, answer. I give you this great answer and I stop, and there's no warmth. There's no conversation. There's no emotion. And I'm just afraid in those cases, companies will say, this person was kind of smart, but I didn't feel I got to know them. I'm not sure, I'd want to work with them 50 hours a week. So you can't just go in there trying to answer the questions. You've got to make room for some dialogue and listening. And I don't know how you feel about this analogy. It's like a first date. I mean, if you went on a date and just sat there and answered questions the person asked you with no humor, no back and forth, I don't think that date would go to a second date. I mean, the chemistry counts, okay? And then what really makes that farther, and I just find intoxicating, is when I interview people, I want them to show some curiosity, right? I want them not to wait till the end to ask questions. I want them to show some, again, if I ask them a question about ambiguity and they answer it and give me a story, I want them to say, so how much ambiguity is there here at the company? Do you already have some structure in place? Do you need someone who can build it completely from scratch? Tell me more about that. And I want to have that kind of dialogue, because I want someone who really wants to solve my problems and is smart enough to pick them apart and ask good questions. So a lot of people, I think, are afraid to do that. They hold all their questions till the end, and then it just seems like they just weren't very curious. Now, if you get an interviewer, when I say to do that, I don't necessarily mean on like a phone screening interview where you have an HR person just asking you 10 minutes of questions. I mean, use common sense. If you ask some questions or show curiosity and they shut you down and don't answer them or seem annoyed, well, back off. But so many managers I deal with, they say, a lot of these people seemed really smart, really experienced, but they didn't really get it. They didn't really seem to show much interest. They just seemed like they wanted a paycheck. And I want more people to show that customer focus. Even like, as I say, they're validating things you think you're hearing. So Matt, if I understand correctly, you need someone who can come in and get that spreadsheet built, right? So that you have all the scheduling in place for who's going to build that next Boeing airplane. Am I correct about that? And get them to say, yeah, that's exactly what we need. Or to say, no, you got that wrong. I must have miscommunicated. But I'm testing. My whole mission in an interview is trying to understand what is going on across the desk and what's the company's problems, what's their vision, because that is what makes a salesperson better and able to sell the company the solutions they want. Like you see in the quote at the bottom, you want to be the aspirin to their headache. That's really the metaphor we're shooting for here. Okay. Let's see, a couple questions came in on that one. You get my idea there. Let's see. If you're in, any tips for interviews within one's department, but a different unit? If you're talking about like at your current company where you already work at a company and you're going to change departments, if I'm understanding that, here I'll use my own technique. No, you've kind of stumped me on that one. I can't really think of any just amazing thing to say about that, other than if you're interviewing for a job within the company you've worked at, in most cases, your reputation or your performance record is going to be most of it. So you should have hopefully an advantage in that regard, but every situation is different. Beyond that, I don't unfortunately have much to say about that. I don't even necessarily know on that next one. If I would ask if I can ask questions, I would assume it's a free country. And if I'm dealing with, you know, maybe not a McDonald's minimum wage job, but if it's a professional job and they don't want you asking questions, you got to ask permission. I'm really questioning the power structure here. If someone would be offended by that, I probably wouldn't want to work for that boss. So I don't think I would get permission. I would just ask a question or two and just gauge their reaction and see if they don't seem happy about that. Interview asks you a question. The answer is 1A, but you know, if you say 1A, you don't know, ask more on 1A. Boy, you've kind of stumped me on that one too. 1A. That one, yeah. I guess all I can say on that one, if I'm understanding, is you certainly don't want to bluff. So you don't want to talk out of your rear end if you don't know the answer. I think it is better to say, you know, I'm not sure I have the exact answer to that question. Let me give it a try, or let me tell you how I would think through that and see it. And if I can add more detail, or if I'm not getting it, please tell me. So I would kind of preface up front, I'm not sure I can ace that question, but let me give it a shot. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't make up stuff. If I know they're an expert in something, I would be very dangerous. Like if you're a techie or someone, to try to BS them, because they'll see right through it. Sorry, I don't get that more than maybe what you're really asking. Someone else asked about taking notes. I don't think taking notes as an interview is a very good idea. I think it interrupts the chemistry and the rapport. I think it kind of suggests, you know, you're not listening. I suppose if you've got a particular reason you need to do that, you could ask them permission. Do you mind if I take a few notes? But I'm just giving my gut reaction. I'd rather you race out of that interview and take notes immediately after the interview than do it during the interview, because again, it just interrupts the human connection in my experience. Maybe some other interviewers would disagree. So I'm not a big fan of that. Okay. And yeah, I understand the person who talked about star. I mean, I get the literal different dictionary definition of what star and that means. I think to the average person, though, who's struggling, because a lot of people really struggle telling stories, it's easier to just say, what was the problem? So yeah, if you understand those nuances between situation and task, go for it. But again, there's other methods. Some coaches call it CAR, challenge, action, result. Some call it OR, what was the opportunity, action. I mean, it's all the same basic thing, but it's just one of these little structures. Okay, last but not least, and I'm going to move on. Yes, I do think it's okay to ask who you'll be interviewing with ahead of time. Doesn't mean they necessarily will answer you, but I certainly think it's okay to ask. Okay, let's move on. I'm at an hour and I've got a few more things I got to cover. I also think as part of a good interview strategy, you want to anticipate objections. What are the worst things they could throw at you? Every candidate, virtually every product has weaknesses. So it is better to really think about, if I was trying to kick me out of this job, what tough questions would I ask? Then cross your fingers and hope, I hope they don't ask that. I hope they don't ask that. That's what salespeople do. They anticipate objections and they're great at coming up ways to get around them. So whether you don't have the right degree or the right education, whether you've been a stay-at-home parent and have gaps in your resume, whether you haven't worked in the industry, I mean, there's all kinds, whether you have a lot of short-term jobs and you might look like a job hopper. I mean, most people have one or two or three things like that. So the weirdest thing about that is what, again, my mentor taught me was in most cases, when companies ask you questions about those things, it's actually a cry for help. It is not them trying to be mean to you. It's them basically asking you, it's a buying signal. It's saying, I'm worried about this, help me overcome it, or help me understand it so I can sell you to other people in my company who may not be as open-minded as I am. So why would we hire someone who hasn't worked in the cloud industry? You know, why would we do that instead of hiring someone who has worked in the cloud industry? So it takes a little bit of a mindset shift to understand, you know, they're going to ask me some of these questions and I want to be ready for them. And when they ask me, I'm going to be glad they ask me, because I'd rather have them bring it up so I can talk about it versus not hire me and never tell me the reason, which happens a lot. Okay. So what you want to do with the tough questions is not get defensive, not get angry, embrace the question, as strange as that sounds. Thank you for bringing that up. Or I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk about that. Or I'm not surprised you would ask about my education. Yes, I never actually had the chance to get a college degree. Let me explain to you, why I don't think that's been an issue throughout my career or really gotten in the way of me doing a good job. So the point is, you want to make it okay to talk about these things and build rapport and consensus, not start fighting with them about it. Hey, if I were in your shoes, I would wonder too. Someone who took 5 years to raise kids, are they really ready to come back to the workforce, or have they lost a step? I think it's better to say that out loud and make it okay and show that manager you understand their concern than, again, to get defensive or fight it. So you just embrace it, and then you just come up with the best, 2 or 3 counter arguments you might have. Here's why I don't think it's going to be an issue. Because even though I don't have a degree, I've done a ton of training classes, very up-to-date certifications, and I have a ton of on-the-job experience that I think has taught me exactly what I need to know in these jobs. If it's a gap in your career, you could say, I'm coming back. Why I don't think that's going to be an issue is because I've spent some of my time off to get some really recent training. I have a ton of energy. A lot of people seem really burnt out on their careers, and I'm just itching to go. And I'm also very coachable. I'm not going to come in here as a know-it-all or someone who thinks they have all the answers. I'm really looking for a company who will train me or coach me the way they want things done, and I will learn like a sponge or whatever. But try to come up with the best positive counter arguments you have to offset that objection. And you may not win them all, but see, my point is any of that is better than just getting defensive and say, well, I didn't have a chance to get a degree, or I think degrees are overrated, or anything that will create conflict with that manager or not give them ammunition to get over that. To them, they're saying, I'm having trouble with this. I want your help reassuring me why this isn't an issue. So that's your job, to kind of help them on that, as reverse as that usually seems. Okay, we're about 6:02. I'm going to run to about 6:10 on my slides just to cover these last 2, and then I'll get to some of these final questions. Don't worry. I absolutely wanted to get to this one. Number 6 is my favorite tip of all. I'm sure there's a whole range of ages on this call tonight, but I'm sure a good chunk of you, like many of my clients, are very worried about age bias. And as we've talked in some of the past webinars, yes, age bias is undeniably real. It's a big problem in society. There's no easy ways or no real foolproof ways to fix it. But think about for a second, if I were to say one thing that some more experienced candidates do that I think contributes to age bias and might help them overcome that in some cases, is to actually show the value of their experience, what I call on this slide wisdom, okay? So again, I'm generalizing here, and this may not apply to all of you, but I routinely work with clients in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or beyond. Many of them, when I do an interview, will spend way too much time talking about the past. Oh, I did this great thing back in 1987, then I did this for 10 years and this. And see, what I have to gently point out is nobody's hiring your past. They want you to act like your best days are ahead of you, not behind you, because they're not going to reward you for something great you did 15 years ago. So you've got to watch that tendency to keep going back to the past and make sure you show enough excitement. Here's what I'm passionate about now. Here's what I want to do next. Here's I know it may, again, not apply to all of you, but I see that all the time with these war stories, these battle stories. And I think it just reinforces, again, this person's maybe close to retirement and just looking for a cushy job to coast into retirement. They're not still excited and passionate about what they do. And that lends them to maybe go with a younger candidate. Okay. The second thing is, for if you're in a professional level job, especially a manager or an executive, you've got to have a point of view about your work. You've worked in this field 20 to 30 years. If you're an older candidate, you have to have something to say about that. So you can't play it safe and go, well, I think the keys to leadership are just to treat people well and have them get along. I mean, that's just too soft. That's too squishy. Any advice you give that a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old could give, it begs the question, well, what was the value of that extra 20 years of experience? If there's nothing you learn from that 20 years that makes you better at it, why wouldn't someone hire someone with 2 years? So I think a lot of older candidates need to think really hard. When they look at an advertisement, if that advertisement says, like, I'll give you an example. I had a candidate where the advertisement said, we need someone who's good at creating and fostering teamwork in a company. So I was interviewing a older executive, and I asked her that question. I said, Wendy, how do you foster teamwork in your companies? And her first answer was terrible, in my opinion. She just said, oh, teamwork, you got everyone on the same page and rowing in the same direction and working together. And she said like that for 30 seconds. And I said, oh, gosh, that's terrible. I said, not only are you just defining teamwork, which I already know what teamwork is, I go, a high school kid could tell me that. And I kind of shamed her. And I said, you've been a CEO for years and years. Are you sure that's all you've learned about teamwork, or the best answer? So I basically said, think for a second. Don't just speak. Think for a second, or think ahead of time, and really find that wisdom. Really find something you can say about that topic that the other candidates and the younger candidates probably won't, because they don't have as much experience. So in this real situation, she came back and she was a very quick study. And I said, Wendy, let's try that again. How do you foster teamwork? And she very thoughtfully said, well, Matt, that's a great question. I've been on dozens of teams as a follower, as a leader. And the more I've thought about teamwork, the more I think it is largely an illusion. And she stopped for a second. And I don't know about all of you, but I was just like, what'd you say, an illusion? It just woke me up, because it was not what I was expecting, the standard cliche answers. I was like, what do you mean it's an illusion? So she went on to say, I think a lot of inexperienced leaders think teamwork is all about one to many, that you've got to get up in front of a group or take a vote and try to influence 50 people at once, or charm them or bully them. But she goes, what I learned a long time ago as a leader is people tend to be very hierarchical. So if I've got a big team decision or a team initiative, I figure out who's the handful of individuals in the company everyone looks to, everyone respects, and I go work with those people one-on-one ahead of the team thing to get them on my side. I twist their arm, I see what they're thinking, and then when we have the all hands on deck meeting, I've got the deck stacked. I know if these 3 people agree with me, all the 100 other people are going to get in line, because that's how people work. So she just said, I think teamwork is an illusion because people don't talk about the one-to-one influence in relationships that can really contribute to teamwork on a bigger scale. Right or wrong, I'm still thinking about that answer like 8 years later. So my point is, it was really original, very sticky, and I think it showed, wow, you've really thought about this. Do you have more of these answers about things you do that make you seem a lot smarter than some of the other people? So wisdom, wisdom, wisdom. I mean, anyone at any age could have it, but I think older candidates, they can fight back a little bit against some of the age bias if they have well thought, insights about the work they do that a younger person may not have. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to quickly tackle these 3 answers. One that's been sitting around a long time. My apologies. Should we apply for a job through a recruiter or directly with the company? If the company is advertising the job on the website, I would apply through the company, so they don't have to pay a fee to the recruiter. And we're talking an external recruiter, not a recruiter who works for the company like Amazon. If the recruiter approached you about the job, or the company is not advertising on their website, it may be the company retained that recruiter to fill this job and they're not taking direct applications. So if that recruiter is the only source you can find of that job, or you can ask them, do you have exclusive rights to this search, then I would work with the recruiter. But if it's a toss-up, if it's the company has the ad right there on their website, in most cases, I would just apply directly. It's going to end up in the same hands, and it's not going to necessarily incur a recruiting fee. So it's a benefit to them. Someone asked about mentioning personal business and self-employment during an interview in the resume. I generally think it is, unless we're talking something that really didn't go well. Like, you know, if you set up a business for 2 months and it failed, it may not be enough there to put it in there. If I'm trying to think of other situations, you know, the less relevant it would be to what you want to do now. If I owned a chain of pizza joints and I now want to be an accountant, I mean, even then I could draw a connection. So, but generally, yeah, self-employment is something you would talk about in an interview on the resume. And it will, you know, you'll probably have good examples for the behavioral questions that draw from that. So yeah, there'd have to be a compelling reason not to include it, which is normally it was too short-lived or just didn't go well or something. But generally, yes, you would talk about it. Someone said, if you research a company, I like this question, research a company ahead of an interview, should you mention that or mention things about them? Like if you saw something on LinkedIn, you got to be really careful on that because it can seem like you're stalking them. So like if you read their LinkedIn profile and it says they do bike racing and you show up at their office, hey, I see you race bikes and da-da-da. You know, most of us get a little weirded out about that. So you should do that research, but be very careful about just trying to be too buddy-buddy about it. You might say something like, hey, I saw that you on your LinkedIn, you had that great quote about whatever, or I saw that you used to work at XYZ company. Yeah, my father did, or something. But be a little careful about just trying to ingratiate yourself, because some of them, you know, they pick up on that. But you know, that research is still a good idea. All right, last but not least, and then we'll finish up and I'll start tackling more questions. The final piece of an interview, how do you end it on the right note? So of course, in most interviews, they're going to give you a chance. They usually give you a chance at the end to ask questions. So do you have any questions for us? Yes, you should have questions. If you don't have any questions, it basically says you're so nervous you want to race out of there, or I hate to say it, but you just don't want the job, or you're not bright enough to have any questions. So it's usually a negative thing if someone doesn't have questions. Every job, there's so much that goes into it. There's definitely questions to be asked. Okay, so you want to show them that you're interested, you're engaged, you're curious, as I keep saying. The funny thing, though, is I don't like pre-planned questions. Every interview book says, here's a whole bunch of questions you should ask. What would the ideal candidate accomplish in the first 90 days? What is the single most important factor you're looking for in a candidate? Those kind of pre-planned questions are better than nothing. But see, the problem I keep having is they're so robotic. I would rather have someone ask genuine questions because they listen to me as an interviewer and try to understand my problems. So I'd much rather have someone say, so Matt, yeah, I have a question. About 20 minutes ago, you were asking about influencing across departments. I got the sense maybe that your departments aren't working all that well together, or maybe there's been some issues there. Can you tell me more about that? Or is that something the ideal person you hire, you'd want them to try to resolve? Great, get me talking about that. If I asked you about MS Excel skills, say, yeah, you had mentioned about Excel skills. I'm pretty good with Excel. What aspects of Excel do you need someone to know how to use? Is it pivot tables, conditional formatting? You see, my point is I want you to be engaged with this person and ask questions like you were having a human conversation. It's not all a performance where you have a flashcard and you read a question off. That to me seems very wooden and very contrived. So again, if you're a really nervous interviewer, maybe you need some of those just to be prepared. But I'd much rather have you pay attention and ask questions. Again, what I said earlier, focus on understanding what they need done. That is your saving grace. Don't focus on yourself. I want to learn more about what this company needs done. Okay? And then last but not least, as far as my 7 main points, just finish the interview, thank them for their time, obviously. Tell them, yes, I've really gotten a good understanding of what you need doing. And I think it's important to say, I hope you'll consider me for your team, or I'd really love to be a member of your team. Because sometimes if you don't say that, I know it sounds crazy because they think, why would you show up for the interview? You didn't want the job. But I've had managers who say sometimes people, I can't tell if they actually want the job or if they're just looking for a paycheck or just fulfilling their unemployment requirements, or maybe I said something that didn't interest them. So it's important at the end to say something. You don't want to say, did I get the job? But say, this is great. I'm even clearer about what you need, and it looks like exactly the step I want to take next. Again, I'm sure you're talking to some other good people, but I'd love to be considered a serious candidate. There's just something important about saying that kind of thing that could give you that extra nudge at the very last second, and it leaves the interview on a really good note. Okay? Someone asked, if you struggle to remember your ad hoc question, should you take a note? And like I said, I don't want to make you paranoid. It's probably okay to jot a note down once or twice or ask them permission. Just don't seem like you're dictating the whole interview. That's what I'm worried about. So yeah, if you have a brilliant question and you have to say, do you mind real quick? I want to come back to something. Can I take a quick note? I think that's okay. I think most interviewers would be fine with that. Okay, where it all comes together, and then I'll shut up and start answering questions. The last slide I have in here, this takes some work, but all the stuff I tried to show you tonight, if you wanted a little framework to maybe prep for interviews, I kind of put this thing together. I call it the 4-step preparation matrix. So you just set up a little 5-column Excel worksheet, or you do a Microsoft Word table with 5 columns. And see, I look at interviews like back in when I was a student, like I'm prepping for a test. Now, I don't want you to treat it like a test, right? I want you to have the chemistry. But as far as just getting prepared, what I would do is down the left column, I would put each significant thing the employer says they want. So whether it's 5 things or 10 things or 12 things, pick out every specific thing that they wanted. Oh, they wanted someone with an obsession for customers and who could deal with ambiguity and who knows, here's 3 examples. I then want you to give yourself a grade, A to F, and this is stupid, but my point is if you're less than an A or a B, Google it and get smart about it. So even if you haven't used a piece of software or you're rusty and you haven't done XYZ for 15 years, we have the internet so you can go learn about it quickly and at least talk about it better. Well, I haven't used that software, but I'm familiar with it. Didn't they just come out with version 5.6? I mean, it's amazing how many people, there's things in the job description they just get stumped on and they never do that extra research. Now, maybe all of you do that, but I still meet people who don't do that. So I think it's important to kind of grade yourself. This next column is where you put your examples. So all those behavioral, star, or PAR formats, I don't mean write the whole thing out, but just put a note to yourself. If they ask me about this, customer service, I'm going to use this example. If they ask me about ambiguity, I'm going to use this example. And just make sure you have an example that correlates with each of the key things they said that they may ask you about. Common sense. If you have that wisdom I talked about, those interesting insights, those strong points of view, put a little note to yourself in that next column. Oh, I've got this great insight about pleasing customers, or I had this way that I've learned to deal with ambiguity. I want to make sure to remember. I'm going to put a note to myself there. And I put an NA for the bottom one just to say sometimes maybe you don't come up with a brilliant insight. It doesn't have to have everything filled out. But, and then the last column is to practice questions back. What would be a smart, value-added question if they asked you about customer service and you answered? Occasionally, what could you ask back to learn more about their problems and what's going on? So again, it takes a little bit of work, but it kind of, to me, creates a knowledge base about you as a product that anticipates almost every question they could ask you and make sure you're ready for it. Now, if they ask you something out of left field no one could have predicted, what kind of tree would you be? You and everyone else is just going to have to wing it. But I have a lot of my clients do this, and once they do it once, for other interviews at other companies, usually just have to add a couple new rows because a lot of the same qualifications are the same. So I certainly can't make you do this. You may choose not to do this, but this would be the most intensive way I would prep someone for an interview, is to kind of fill out this grid and just be ready for almost anything we could predict. So thought I would put that in there just in case any of you want to adopt that method. Okay? So that's what I had for you tonight as far as my own formal thoughts. As we've done in the past webinars, we've got about 12 minutes to go. I'm going to go back up to the top and let me quickly answer these questions best I can. So someone said specifically at Boeing, you're not allowed to take notes during the interview. Oh, I'm sorry, you are allowed to take notes during the interview, and they use STAR, but you have to give them the notes back at the conclusion of the interview. So the funny thing about that is, yeah, every company has their specific interview. We certainly can't anticipate everyone, but things like that at Boeing or Amazon or the big companies, if you have a friend or a friend of a friend who works there, that's the advice they should be able to give you if you reach out to them. Or if you use those sites like Glassdoor and Career Bliss, hopefully there's some people who will say that in the interview tips. Oh, you have to take notes, but you can give it back to them. So thanks for chiming in. Some companies do have those really specific methods that, you know, you can follow or hopefully get a heads up on. Someone said, yeah, really commonly junior recruiters interview you who don't know the first thing about the job and ask you stupid questions. I mean, that's sadly part of life. You don't want to make those recruiters feel stupid because they're the ones who decide your future. So all I can tell you is play the game with them. Try to win them over. Try to, again, you know, make them feel good, make them feel you like them, because that's what's going to contribute. I suppose, you know, if they asked you a question that was just wrong, if they said, you know, how would you use this to do this? And you're just like, you just can't. I would gently say, maybe can you rephrase the question? Or in my understanding, it doesn't actually work that way. Maybe I'm not understanding. I would sort of try to show some modesty and point out their question wasn't a good one. But there's just not a lot you can do there if a company wants someone to do the screening that doesn't know much about it. Again, just try to win them over as you would anyone, with some charm, with some confidence. Hopefully they pass you through to someone who knows what they're talking about. Thank you emails after interviews. I think the days of thank you cards and handwritten notes are virtually dead. They were a long time. That was what you did. I think thank you emails, pretty much you should send them to anyone you interviewed with if you have their emails. If you interview with a ton of people, just send it to the whoever coordinated it, the HR person, and just say, please thank Ted, Mary, Susan, and John for me. But I do think it's a nice touch to send them and to just quickly say, I enjoyed meeting you, maybe restate a thing or two you learned about the problems in the job. You know, I really like what you had to say about your goal of beating out Lyft, and that looks like exactly the kind of problems I would be great at helping you solve. I look forward to next steps and would love to work for your team. So kind of the same stuff I said earlier, just in written format. But yeah, emails are generally still a good touch. How do you get recruiters to support your profile? I mean, that's more of a LinkedIn question. I don't know what support actually means. If the question is how do you get recruiters to find your profile, that's everything we covered in the first webinar, if you can get a recording of that. And if they find your profile and reach out to you and they don't move you past that, that could be a million reasons. I mean, it maybe you just didn't have the skills that particular recruiter was looking for, but it could also be some of the answers I coached you on tonight could be better. But I can't answer that one more specifically. If it's about getting recruiters to find your profile, go back to the first webinar I taught, because it's all about that stuff. Someone asked about resumes from last week. If you use a different name or byline for published works and they're critical of the job, and you use your full name on the resume, I would use your full name on the resume, on your LinkedIn profile, on any official application type documents, use your full name. But on your resume or LinkedIn, you might have a section that says publications and presentations. Just put a note there that says written under the byline, you know, what is Stephen King's, or no, anyway, there's some famous authors with pseudonyms. But yeah, just mention that down in the publication section, authored under the by name or something like that. But I would put your legal name on the actual documents. Oh, great question. Can you ask for interview feedback? You can ask. Hey, how can you share anything about how I did? And this would normally be if you don't get the job, right? You're just dying to know, why didn't you get the job? Unfortunately, thanks a lot to legal and attorneys weighing in, most companies won't give you feedback because either they don't have time or they're afraid you're going to use it against them. That if they say, well, you didn't have skills in this, you're going to say, well, yes, I did. And so therefore you must have discriminated. So many companies won't give you actual feedback, sadly, but you can ask and you can try to make it safe for them and say, hey, I totally respect your decision. I'm glad you found the right candidate. I'm always trying to improve my skills. Would you be willing to share any feedback, any room for improvement from my interview? And if you had an interviewer you really clicked with, or someone that was like a friend of a friend, sometimes they will give you that feedback and it can be really useful. But most companies are just not going to do it because they're afraid of the legal repercussions, sadly. If you don't hear back, another good question, if you interview and they ghost you and you don't hear anything, well, of course, if they gave you a timeline, we're not going to get back to anyone for 2 weeks. you just got to wait. I mean, they told you, here's the timeline. But if they didn't say anything, or I would say if a week goes by and there's no reason they gave you why it would take longer, yes, you would check back in, email the person, call them, and just gently say, hey, just checking back in. I'm sure you're busy, but just, really enjoyed my interview last week for the blah, blah, blah position. Just wanted to see where the process was at, and if there's any more information I could send you to support my candidacy. Just, again, be helpful, check in. In a lot of cases, they'll just say, oh, we're just swamped, we haven't gotten to it yet. In other cases, they may give you bad news. Oh, I'm sorry, when it went a different direction. Even then, I'm glad you found out, and you're not twisting in the wind still thinking that it's viable for 3 weeks. And sometimes they'll say, hey, we were going to call you this afternoon and you're the one, come back in. But yeah, I would check in roughly once a week unless they give you reasons why timelines to the contrary. Great question. I don't think you need to emphasize on the wisdom how many years you work. I mean, it's not that they can't figure it out, but just, show off your experience. Talk about, through the many, many roles I've had managing people, here's what I've learned about doing it effectively. Or, the mistake I made early in my career that I recovered from and has actually made me so good now at this. I mean, that's how we're talking. We don't have to actually give dates or years or anything like that. But I keep saying it, theoretically, someone with more experience should be better at stuff. They've failed more, they've succeeded more. It's just a lot of older candidates aren't bringing enough of that out. They just sound like the young candidates, and it doesn't give that interviewer enough reason to select them. So if that's your situation, try to think of some of those powerful statements you can make. What's the value of your experience? Someone asked about technical interviews. Yeah, that's not really my strength. There's so many kinds of technical interviews. It all depends, of course, on the language. There's a ton of internet websites and even interview coaches who are techies who train people on technical interviews. So that's one of the questions I just won't even, all the stuff I taught you tonight should help with the rapport and the chemistry and the soft skills part of a technical interview. But the actual answering questions about computer stuff, again, is going to be a case of preparing for what that job is about. You might have to brush up on that language or that whatever, combined with do some Googling about technical interviews, and some techies have given more advice on that. Yeah, sadly, that's something, not being a techie, I can give really deep interview suggestions on. Let's see. Why did you work for one company, or worries that you were with one company a long, long time, 30 years at Boeing, 30 years at Nordstrom? Yeah, some companies worry about that. They worry if you can learn new things. They worry if you can adapt. So just like slide number 5, assume you're going to get that question and be ready for it. I'm glad you brought that up. You're right. I was spent a lot of time at that one company, Boeing. And I guess some people would worry, what does that say? Is a person stagnated? But honestly, the reality is my career there was much more dynamic than it looks. I had multiple promotions. I did a lot of different things for the company, and I was always challenged. So I didn't just stick around because I was bored or didn't want to work hard. As Boeing kept giving me challenges that I thought were really exciting. So I understand why some people would think that, but to me, it almost feels like I worked for 5 different companies at Boeing because of the very different divisions I was in. I mean, I just made all that up, but that's the kind of answer you want to give. You want to anticipate it and then give them some nice, positive, I understand why you feel that way, but here's another way to think about it that maybe is a little more positive. At the end of the interview, how do you know if you have a good chance to be hired? That's a great question. There's a lot of interviews with really good poker faces that you could think you did great, and they ruled you out 2 minutes in and just were nice to you. And I've seen many people who said they bombed an interview and they got the job. So to me, I think the most reliable method, it's not that it really matters because you'll either get it or you won't, but is to say, did it go over time? If they spent more time with you than they initially said they would, that's a foolproof, they know how to end the interview early if it's not going well. So if you spent a little more time, or if the time seemed to pass quickly, that's another very reliable sign. Holy cow, it's been an hour already? Geez, I feel like we just started. Whether on a date or in any social situation, that's a sign there was chemistry. If you're 20 minutes in and it feels like an hour, things aren't maybe going well. And then, of course, if they say anything positive, like, well, your desk is going to be over there, or, we love that you've got this. I mean, if they give you positive buying signs, I think we can assume those are good things. But yeah, there's not a foolproof way to know, but those are some little things you can watch for.
Matt Bertowitz at a 2-minute time check.
Yep. Okay.
I would say let's pick 2 of your favorite questions.
2 of them. Okay. I think we already talked about, or someone mentioned the STAR process at Amazon, so don't count that as one of my 2. I think we already spoke to that. Yes, it is absolutely beneficial to ask an internal employee to refer you to the company, or at least ask them, do you have a referral system, or do you have any tips on getting hired at XYZ company? Kind of let them decide how formal. I mean, if it's a really good friend, hopefully they'll do everything they can. But if it's someone you don't know well, just say, hey, I'm interviewing, or I'm really interested in this job. Do you have any tips on the hiring process at Costco? I would love any thoughts you have. And just kind of invite them passively to see if they'll, oh, we've got a referral system or something like that. I would only ask them directly if you know, I mean, if you have a relationship with them and you think it's appropriate. But any way you slice it, absolutely try to build a networking connection at the company to kind of get some relationship juice to help you instead of just your resume. You bet. Anyone whose question I didn't ask, feel free to drop me an email. I'd be happy to answer it. My email should be on these materials, but it's Matt, M-A-T-T, @career-horizons.com. The only, I guess the last question I would pick, apologies to the others, if you have back-to-back video interviews, who should you rely on to facilitate the ending of the conversation so you can be on time? Okay, so if I understand that question, you've got a bunch of interviews in a series, and if somebody runs over, you're not going to make the next interview, right? So if that company is not on the ball or paying attention to time, I do think if you notice that, you have to check in and just say, hey, this is great. I sure enjoy it. I believe my next round of interviews with your next person there is at 11 o'clock. Do we need to wrap this up, or is there, do you think they can wait a little bit? And just kind of gently give them the hint, we might need to wrap things up. So if they're not already winding it down, just like PU did here for me, 2-minute warning, yeah, just check in with them gently and let them know about that time issue. And usually they'll solve it. They'll say, oh, we got to stop, or I will email the next person, tell them we're going to be 10 minutes late, but they'll have the power to fix that problem. Okay. Okay, I think we're at time, everybody. Thank you so much for coming not only to this webinar, but perhaps some of the others. I hope some of those tips, at least some of them, will help you interview better and more confidently. And just as a final reminder, as PU will say, the recording and the slides are available if you need to go back and study them a bit, because we did cover a lot of ground in 90 minutes.
Thank you, Matt. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody who attended. Thank you very much, Matt. This has been very enlightening. This is sort of the first time we've done this, as I mentioned, not just in format, but also content and series and whatnot. And we've received so much good feedback. It's been a great experience for all of us. And as I said, I can't even believe it's been 4 weeks, even though it feels like it's been 15 years at the same time.
Time flies thing. It's
Exactly. And thank you to the Edge team with Jamie, Derek, and others. And I know there are others working in the background and marketing. Jo Gubas is our director of fundraising. She's been quietly here. She actually came up with the idea for these series. So as I mentioned before, the recordings are going to be posted. The slides are going to be posted. We're going to leave it for a year. And maybe even later, maybe even more. If you have any feedback or ideas for other events or things you like, programming that you'd like to see from us, do drop us a line at Enrollment Services, or you can call them. And thank you again. Matt, did you want to say anything final?
No, I think I'm good to go. Again, appreciate you all coming, and thanks again to UW and, like you said, all the staff that made these happen. And perhaps we'll do more in the future. But good luck with your careers, everybody, and go Huskies.
All right. Thank you, Jamie.